Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm your host and Fine Woodworking editor, Tom McKenna. And with me this episode are Executive Art Director Mike Pekovich.
Good morning.
Special Projects Editor Matt Kenny.
Hey, folks.
And our web producer, Ben Strano. Hi, Ben.
Hello, Ben.
And as always, Jeff Rose is helping us behind the camera. Before we get started with the questions and the content, I have to take care of some business. This podcast is sponsored by Titebond. Even if you're not a professional woodworker, you want to use the glue the pros use. And 3 out of 4 pro woodworkers trust Titebond as their choice for building wood furniture or cabinets, to making picture frames or birdhouses, or just general repairs around the house. Titebond has the widest choice of glues to help with whatever project you want to tackle. Titebond, the right glue for your next project. Learn more at titebond.com or see them on Facebook. All right, now let's roll on and start yammering. First,
and go.
Who's up first? First thing, we just received notice. Well, not notice. That's kind of a really highfalutin way to say it. But
that we're all fired?
The latest episode of the Highland Woodworker TV show is live and rolling along, and
Awesome.
Matt was in it, and Garrett Hack was interviewed.
I'm in this one?
Yeah,
I'll have to watch it.
yeah. Tune on.
Speaking of Matt, Garrett Hack was great. You were wonderful too. No, I like Garrett on there because Garrett is Garrett, whether you're just hanging out or he's in front of an audience or in front of a camera. He's just
The same
guy.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I was just up to visit Garrett too, and it is like Mike said, he doesn't change from being on the set, so to speak, to being just in the shop one-on-one. It's pretty cool. And I really liked one of the things that I like about the show is when Charles interviews people, he lets them talk. He doesn't interrupt. Kind of lets them finish their sentences.
What are you talking about?
What? Just like that. But it's really good. It's a short interview with Garrett, but you really get a good glimpse of where he's working and what he's about.
Yeah. Garrett has a good sense of humor, too.
Yes.
He's funny. He laughs at my jokes.
Well, I don't know if that makes him funny. But if you want to check out the latest episode, it's number 26, and you can go to thehighlandwoodworker.com. That's thehighlandwoodworker.com. It's a really good episode. Go check it out.
What am I doing in the episode?
You are doing, what were you doing?
Miter still?
Was it miters or
Miters.
No.
I'm still mitering a small box.
I think so.
Oh, I thought you were planing thin stock. Wasn't it the sled?
Oh, yeah. That little jig for...
Oh, with the rails on each side?
Yeah, for
That's very
planing
cool.
boards, really thin boards to final dimension. Yeah.
Yeah. Matt will tune in later today, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we filmed those things like almost a year ago, right?
In March.
Right. This year?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's like a year.
It's like a year. It feels like a year.
It sure does.
Anyway, let's get to some questions. The first one comes from Jordan, and Jordan says, I live on the south side of Chicago, and I have set up a small shop with what seems like 30 babies within earshot. Due to these size and noise constraints, I've decided to go hand tool only for now. I began to build with what tools I can
I can't.
He's building tools when he can. He's making his own tools.
I began to build what tools I can.
There you go.
Thank you. I should rehearse this.
And what are those tools?
He's built some planes and a bow saw, etc.
Ooh, I really need an et cetera.
But I can't find much information on how to finish a wooden tool, if at all. I've read that no finish and paste wax is ideal. Any insights?
Matt, you're the tool maker on staff here. What do you do?
I have made tools, and I normally just finish them with tried and true. So it's a Danish oil. That's what I use, just a Danish oil. Just to soak it in and give it a little bit of protection. I mean, I wouldn't put shellac on it. I mean, you could just do paste wax, I guess. That's fine. Although, if you put paste wax on any surface that's going to be rubbing on wood, it's not going to stay there for very long. So why put it there? And also, paste wax has a tendency when you put it on something like like a shooting board surface or like a marking gauge fence or something, it has a tendency not to just come off, but also to sort of like clump up in dirty little blobs on the wood. So I wouldn't use paste wax on those surfaces. I think I would just go with some kind of like a Danish oil that has some varnish in it, but not a lot.
Tried and true.
Like tried and true.
On your little molding planes, are you concerned about sealing the end grain to sort of help mitigate movement at all? Or is that kind of a non-issue as well?
I wasn't concerned about that. No, I'm not. I've never been concerned about that, and it's never been an issue. They're still straight and work properly after 7 years or whatever it's been since I made them. I think it's more you select the right cut of wood for your plane bodies or anything like a fence for a marking gauge or what have you, and then you make sure that it you season it properly, so to speak.
What's the right cut?
Well, it varies depending on the tool. But for say a marking gauge, I would probably use rift sawn or quarter sawn if I could. That way, the wood movement is going to be in the thickness and not in the height of it. So I think it would be less likely to cup. So I think that's what I would use for a hand plane. You want to use, for
the Krenov style planes, I was told to use rift sawn stock because it's the most stable in each axis.
Right. Yeah. When you get into molding planes and stuff, honestly, I shouldn't say because I've never made a true molding plane, and so I don't want to say. You want to use Corian for those, or marble, granite.
Just don't take it for granted. All right. The next question comes from Marcus. Hey, fellas, when building wall cabinets, how do you fix them to drywall? And you don't. You fix them to studs.
Drywall compound.
Well, on small cabinets, I tend to hang all my cabinets with a French cleat. It's sort of a two-part cleat. Basically, two strips of wood. Each piece has a 45-degree angle ripped along one edge. And so half of that gets screwed to the case, and then the other half gets screwed to the wall, and they sort of made up, and it holds it in place. I like that because then instead of trying to get a cabinet where you want it and try to hold it square while you're somehow trying to attach it, a little cleat is really easy to sink in one screw, get your level on there, get it nice and level, and put the other one in. For small cabinets, I don't necessarily need to worry about hitting a stud. I use those little plastic sleeves. You drill sort of an oversized hole, pound them in, and screw those in. I think those are typically rated for up to like 60 or 80 pounds, which is a lot.
Yeah, that's plenty.
Get different. Yeah.
You get two of those in there, you're going to hold 160 pounds,
Yeah.
You're putting lead
You can hang your
and
children.
cast iron in these little cabinets.
There are times when I definitely want to go get into a stud, and sometimes it's just if I can get one in, that's good for my tool cabinet in my shop. That's wide enough where it spans multiple studs, so those are really sunk in. But Chris Bexford had a really cool trick. His French cleat, he has sort of almost like a T-shaped cleat where he has a vertical which he can get multiple screws into a stud, and then the little top part is your French cleat, and it allows him to get a really solid purchase with a French cleat in contacting just a single stud. I wonder if he plans it out to where he figures out where the stud is to mount that vertical along that T.
So it might not be perfectly in the center of the T. It might be more like a gamma.
Somewhere. A gamma.
I don't know.
A capital gamma.
I don't know. Either that or it's just, nope, that's where
it's
the
going to go.
cabinet's going to go.
It's like tough luck, client. That's where where your cabinet's going.
It can go here.
Yeah, right over the toilet.
Or here.
Well, I do things a little bit differently because I only make small cabinets. So I used to when I first started, I was like, oh, you got to make a French cleat. But what's the problem with a French cleat? It eats up interior space.
You do lose whatever the thickness of the cleat is. You lose that thickness.
Right. So I mean, I've done like 1/4-inch thick French cleats on small cabinets, which works. But if your cabinet's only 5 inches deep, and you eat up 1/4 to 3/8 with a cleat, and then another 1/4 to 1/2 inch with the back.
Sure.
You're really significantly chopping down how much interior space there is in that cabinet. So what I started to do on small cabinets, and a lot of the cabinets I make are maybe 10 to 12 inches wide, up to 24 inches tall, something like, that would be the maximum dimensions there.
Right.
And I make a back out of plywood and cover it in shop sawn veneer so it's not ugly, and glue it into a rabbet. So you have a really strong back to cabinet connection there. Right. So then what I do, because these are lightweight cabinets that are not going to be holding, your gold doubloon collection. So that, you're not putting a lot of weight in them. So there's always drawers at the bottom.
Right.
So I go to the top row of drawers, and there will be 2 holes through the back behind the top row of drawers.
Okay.
And then I attach through those holes in the glued-in back in drywall, I would use anchors. Now, if possible, one of those would go into a stud, but it's not always possible. And then you just use two anchors. And if you're really worried about it, instead of using those plastic pop-in anchors, you could use a toggle anchor.
Those I've used those too.
That's never coming out. They're really strong. And I've mounted, hung numerous cabinets this way, and it's not a problem.
Yeah.
But the key is small cabinet that's not going to hold a lot of weight. And you can hang it from the bottom third then. Now, I'm sure we're going to get emails and, letters of complaint because I do that. But, you know what I always say.
Why is it because you're attaching it low instead of up high, and it could lever out? Yeah, no, it's fine.
It is fine.
Sure, it's fine. What I mean, speaking of the notion about losing all that depth with the French cleat and the back on a shallow cabinet, for me the biggest issue is when I do that, if I have a drawer at the bottom, it ends up being really short.
Exactly.
I hate that. Yes. It's really tippy.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a lot of times I'll stop my back at the drawer little shelf. And
cheeky.
it just gives me that extra half inch of drawer length there. Just to make it not quite so tippy when
That's
it comes
a neat
out.
idea.
And then you put in a different type of back behind the drawers, or what do you do there?
Nothing. All the way through the wall.
Yeah,
Just all the way to the wall.
Yeah. But then I have a little stop on the inside where a lot of times on a small piece, I'll let the back of the case be my drawer stop. In this case, I don't want it to bonk against the wall. That's weird. So I'll have to do a little stop on there.
I like how clever that is, but I'm never going to do it. Sorry.
Touche.
I might try that out.
Yeah, I've done both of those methods with plywood, attaching it straight to the wall, and then of course I did it at the top, so I'm not going to get the angry emails that Matt's going to get.
No, I'll forward them to you.
Thanks.
I'm not going to respond to them. I'll let Ben do that.
But we did a great article, I think, a few years ago about hanging cabinets, and there are all sorts of different types of cleat methods.
Yes.
It's really solid. So
That's where Chris Becksford's T-cleat is.
It
in
is.
that article. It's,
Yeah.
what's it called? How to hang a cabinet, or
we'll look at it.
Yeah, I think it's something really creative like that.
Yeah.
and it was the
best way to hang a cabinet?
No, it was
How to hang a cabinet. How to came up.
moderately clever.
So
Moderately clever.
Yeah. Ben will find that, and you can put a link to it on the blog page.
He's giving us 2 thumbs up. I think they're thumbs.
It could be middle fingers.
All right. It's time for our first segment. It's time for our all-time favorite tool of all time for this week. Do you want to go first, Mike?
sure. I recently made some clamp purchases, and the clamps weren't something I would in the past expect to buy, but I've kind of started to like them a lot more. And they're the clamps, the aluminum, I think they're the Universal brand aluminum bar clamps with the little ratchety little jaw on one end and just a screw on the other. Bob Van Dyke has tons and tons of those at Connecticut Valley, and I teach there quite a bit, so I end up using those all the time. And his are all kind of like gunked up with glue, and I don't know. But even with that, I just sort of got in the habit of using them, and some of my parallel jaw clamps are starting to get a little bit tired. The jaws aren't really parallel, and pipe clamps are pipe clamps, and I don't have a good bar clamp, so I thought I'm going to get me a bunch of these aluminum bar clamps. And I like them a lot. The downside is that they flex a little bit, but what I like about them is that in a lot of gluing situations like dovetails, mortise and tenon joints, case construction, you don't need a lot of clamping pressure. You need just enough pressure to keep the joint closed, because any more pressure isn't going to make the joint any stronger, and it can just do bad things like rack things out of square and flat. So on a big heavy clamp, especially those like the Jorgensen style, I-beam clamps are really heavy, and you actually have to put a lot of pressure on the clamp jaw just to hold them in place so they don't fall off. So the light aluminum guys, that's what I do like about them, is you can put just enough pressure to keep the clamp, the joint closed without the clamp falling off.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm sorry, Matt. I was going to say, point that out. How much pressure do we really need? And
57.3 pounds per
square meter.
Yes,
750 foot-pounds.
My rule of thumb is a lot of times if it's a joint like a dovetail or a really tight mortise and tenon, I'll put enough clamping pressure to close the joint, and then I'll back off on the pressure as much as I can with keeping the joint closed.
The point I was trying to make was that, a lot of the clamping tests we've done, we've always tested flexing and things like that. And it's like, well, in reality, I've got some fairly inexpensive aluminum bar clamps that I use all the time, and they're working fine. So, they do. Sometimes I can see them flexing if I really, cinch down on it, but I'm rarely going that hard.
Sure. And for panel glue ups where you have long grain joints, that is where clamping pressure is really important. But even then, the clamps flex a little bit. But if your glue joint is square and jointed square and you oppose your clamps, they may want to flex. But if you balance that, and even if you're gluing it up with a slight bow, once you take the clamps off, it's going to straighten out to how square your glue joint is anyway. So this whole notion that you need them dead flat in order to end up with a flat panel, I don't really buy that either. So anyway, new clamps, I like them.
But Matt's holding his tongue. I don't know why.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you two. You were just, so please go on. I was just saying, don't these aluminum clamps, they have a fairly short jaw height.
Yeah.
So I think that would be beneficial, because when you're doing like a dovetail and you use, say, a parallel jaw clamp, and you do not use a caul, you get clamping pressure not just on the joint, but also into the cabinet sides. And that, I have found, can rack or put unnecessary pressure on the cabinet.
Yeah.
And so I always put cauls when I'm clamping up dovetails so that the pressure only goes right onto the joint.
Yes.
And with those tiny little jaws of the aluminum bar clamps, you only get the pressure right on the joint, right?
Yeah, that's the drawback for that style of clamp. I sort of equate those basically to a lighter weight pipe clamp, little square jaw. And the problem is, how do you transfer the glue pressure deeper into like a case glue up with those? So you end up using curved cauls or something like that, or pull out a parallel jaw clamp or F-style clamps to get the pressure where you need it. So
I really like them when I'm doing my airplane models. I have just the right amount of clamping pressure.
Just enough for that balsa wood to flex but not break.
All right.
It's really important.
It is.
Nice. All right, Matt, go ahead.
What are we doing?
Tool.
Oh, tools. Oh, right. I don't know. My favorite tool this week is something that I've owned for a while, but haven't used for a while, but I pulled it out because it was the perfect tool to use. A Festool Domino. It's my favorite tool of all time this week. And I'm actually just going to stir the pot.
The big one or small one?
The small one. It's not too expensive, so shut up.
Who are you talking to?
To whoever out there who said it's too expensive when I said Festool Domino, just shut up. It's not too expensive. It's a great tool, and it does it's awesome, actually. It's an awesome tool. And I used it. I would love to say, I used it to make this awesome piece of furniture. But what I did use it was to make a jig. And the jig I made was basically a 45-degree ramp that I can put. I'm making a tea box for this client in England, and I'm nervous about the joinery, miter joint. So
because they drink a lot of tea.
They drink a lot of tea, and I have no idea whether it's humid over there or what. I know it's stuffy, but I don't know if it, So I was going to do a spline in the miter joint, but I don't want the spline showing, so it's going to be a stopped spline, right? So that means you need stopped dados, I guess, in the miter joint. So the way I'm going to do that is this: I've got this ramp, which will allow me to drop the joint down onto a router bit, push it along the router bit, then pull it back up.
Okay.
So, and I needed some kind of support for the ramp to hold it at 45 degrees, which I made, triangular, 2 triangular supports out of poplar, 3 pieces each. They have 45-degree angles on them. Not easy to screw together.
Right.
So I was like, hey, the perfect thing would be a floating tenon. And it was perfect. And the domino went right even on the 45 miter and just zip, zip.
Bonk, bonk,
and then, on the mating piece, zip, zip.
Bonk, bonk,
and
bonk.
that thing went together, and it was, I didn't really even need to clamp it. Just banged it together and let the glue dry, and it was perfect.
Yeah.
So I love that tool. It is fantastic.
Yeah, it's my next big tool purchase. I think I've convinced myself.
Right. Now you just have to convince your wife.
Done.
Yeah.
Well, I have kind of a 2-part all-time favorite tool of all time. One is I have one of those DEWALT 1.25 horsepower compact routers. It's comes with both a plunge base and a fixed base.
Yeah, I have that.
I pretty much keep it in the plunge most of the time, and I love this thing. It's pretty much my go-to handheld router. And I've used it for inlay mostly before, but I've wanted to use it for more joinery, and so I'm building this case, and I've got some shelves in it. And I wanted to route some dados into the side. So I thought, all right, here we go. Went out and I bought a fence for it finally. That was like the big purchase, of $30 fence. And the fence was awesome. It took me a little bit of time to figure out how it worked and in terms of like which slot it goes into or whatever. But it really made the tool that much more useful. Like I said, I was using it mostly for excavating stuff, but once I got into the joinery aspect and had the fence there, it was awesome. And the light, the router itself has a bright LED. You can see where your lines are, and I was making stopped cuts, and so all I had to do was mark it on the cabinet side and just do it by eye. I didn't need any kind of mechanical stop. It was really, really neat. So get a router fence.
How are you using? So it's like a edge guide, right?
Yeah,
How are you using that to do dados?
across
Yeah, I know.
Registered on the
from
end
the
of the
top.
piece?
Yeah, on the end. Yeah,
Oh, I see.
yeah.
How long are the rails, like the post on it?
4 feet.
4 feet long?
He's coming in like 3 feet from one edge.
No, there are limits to the fence length, but where my grooves were dados, it was close enough to the edge that
Okay. I was just curious to understand what you were doing.
Yeah, but you can buy extenders, I guess, for it. I discovered, which I didn't buy it when I first got the fence because
they have 8-foot extenders.
But yeah, it's I still love the tool, and now I've made it even better with a little $30 DEWALT router fence.
I have that same router set, with the 2 bases, and I do not have the edge guide. But what I did buy, which made the router just freaking awesome, is the dust collection shrouds for the 2 bases.
Oh, really?
They are fantastic.
Huh.
They work so well. Like when I use that router a lot to route out waste between dovetail pins.
Mm-hmm.
And I slap it on, it has the little shroud on there, and I slap my small shop vacuum onto it. And I mean, all the stuff gets collected.
Oh, cool.
And that's nice because not only is you're not making a mess, but you can actually see where you're routing.
Yeah. Especially like the half-blind dovetails, the sockets get like jammed up with the chips and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
That's funny. The edge guide has a dust collector port, but it didn't work as well. So I should get those adapters that you're talking about.
Is that because it's attached to the fence and not to the router?
Yeah.
So it's
kind of like trying to get the dust closer to the bit or to the port. But cool stuff. Anyway, let's get back to the questions. And this one is, I didn't write the guy's name down. I apologize. But it says, I'm building a couple of bedside tables with 4 drawers each. I'm making the interior stretchers out of poplar, a secondary wood, and will probably make the drawer sides out of the same. Do you recommend finishing the runners and drawer side bottoms to aid in smooth operation? If so, with what? And we talked about this. Mike had some interesting things.
I like just a wash coat of shellac. And so I'll sand it really smooth, wash coat of shellac, and then sand it with fine sandpaper again. And it feels really, really smooth. I used to just wax those parts. The problem is on bare wood, the wax really soaks in, and it was like a pain in the butt and stayed smelly for a really long time. And I find just with the wash coat of shellac first, it just mitigates the amount of absorption with the wax, and it goes on in a much, much thinner coat, dries quicker. I can buff it off. And, you don't want to build up a really heavy, gunky film finish, but I think shellac is the perfect finish for that kind of thing.
Yeah,
cool.
I agree. Or nothing at all.
Well, I've pretty much used wax, but I think I may take up the shellac. It's a good point. We're going to move on? That was a really quick one.
Wow.
Yeah, that was quick and easy. Michael, you can also cinch your shellac for the interior parts with like lilac or something.
Terry Masachi said that. I think she could use like lavender oil or something with the shellac.
Yeah.
I've never tried that. Have you done that?
No.
Oh.
Peter Gedry's also recommended that.
Oh.
Yeah. I have a funny story about that, but I'm not going to tell.
I would prefer like maybe more of a citrus scent or something like
citrus?
that. Yes.
Yeah, like a lemony?
Or pine.
Cedar.
Pine.
Yeah. People
Yeah.
like that. People love, even just like wax, like when you wax something in like a little box and they always smell it. Go, oh,
You know what
that smells great. It's like, well, that's wax.
wax.
the best smell in the world is? It's cooking bread.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
I would like to scent my shellac with cooking bread smell.
Oh,
Wasn't one of the Vegas casinos scented like cooking bread?
I don't know, but you know what they do? They built an old folks home. I don't know what they call them now.
In Vegas?
No, by my by the house I grew up in. And when they built it, there was a big article about it in the newspaper because they were introducing all these new technologies to help invigorate the old folks.
Tasers.
And one of the things they did was into the air conditioning duct system, they had some kind of smell injector. And they would inject like the smell of baking bread because it would make people hungry, and then they would eat their dinners.
Wow. Well, I guess the scents in Vegas make you want to gamble. I don't know.
They do.
I smell money.
That really sounds a lot more nefarious.
Sounds sinister.
Yeah, once you say it out loud,
Right.
yeah, it's not great. Here's one tip in terms of nice smells in regard to woodworking. If you're inviting someone over to your shop, especially if it's a prospective client or something like that, can I come over and see your wood shop? Sure, just get a pine board and run it across your joiner a couple times before they come in, and it smells like, oh, I love the smell of your shop.
Oh,
I love the smell of a wood shop. It's like, yeah, it's a pine board, couple passes, and good to go.
Well, I've got a cat box in my shop, so I'd have to build a whole pine chest of drawers. It's awful. Anyway, let's get back to
It's also solid dating
question.
advice, Mike.
I don't think Mike needs that. The next question is from Ron. I currently use a router table on an enclosed cabinet with locking casters. And although it works fine, and I use it occasionally as additional outfeed, I think it can free some valuable space by putting it into the table saw extension table. Are there any big advantages or disadvantages that I'm not considering? I don't know. We did a project on that a few years ago in our shop and had some good tips on installing it. I have a separate router table, so I really can't speak to it.
The last time we did that in the magazine, John White made a side feed table, router table for the shop cabinet saw, and he did a really nice job. He had dust collection above the table and below the table, so dust collection wasn't an issue. And the fence attached to your table saw fence with clamps. And the only disadvantage there, which I don't really know how often this would come up, I would hazard almost never, is that if you're in the middle of a table saw setup.
Oh, wait, I need to route something.
And I need to route something. You don't want to move your table saw fence. I just, I could see maybe that could come up.
Yeah.
Conceivably that could, but I doubt it would. I don't think there's any disadvantage, but I would question how valuable is the space of your shop, because unless it's like $300 a square foot, I don't see why.
Yeah, you're creating a whole new project for yourself, and you have a router table that seems to be working just fine.
Yeah. I mean, what are you going to put instead of the router table? I mean, how are you going to use that space? That's the question.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that. I've always wanted to do that, but my side feed table is kind of short, so I don't have the legs out there. And I'm afraid that the weight of a router, big heavy router and router lift without the support legs is like make it too tippy.
It would pull your table saw over.
So
your table saw is really light. It's only a Delta Unisaw. How much does that thing weigh?
You can't leave that thing out and you throw a big old board on there.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd probably just
it's gonna go
fall right over like a weeble wobble.
No,
yeah,
they come back though. I
have a little cabinet style router table. It's a benchtop router table, but it makes it quieter, which I guess is kind of cool. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think
there's not a lot of. I don't think there's a big disadvantage. I think the advantage is it does save space, and my shop is really small, so probably one of these days when I get around to it, I'll do that.
Yeah, my take is that if his router table is working fine, he doesn't need the extra space. Why go through the hassle? But to each his own.
I mean, I would just before you do that, think about what are you going to do with that space in place of a router table.
And think about how you work, like, because Matt brought up a good point that, there may be times when you're trying to make a cut and you need the router table or vice versa. And
well, what I could see happening is not that you need to leave a table saw set up in place, but you need to leave a router table set up in place.
The bit or something
like that. And then you're like, oh, but wait a minute, I forgot to cut this, or, oh, I just misrouted that. Now I got to... I could see needing to leave the router table set up, but not the table saw.
Yeah, I think the one advantage that maybe isn't that great of an advantage is like, I can just use my table saw rip fence as my router fence. It's like,
you can't.
I would probably still have like a single point router fence and a little wing nut to stick it on there if I really wanted to.
A parallel. Yeah, I think you're right. It's nice to be able to not worry about. To be able to pivot the router fence because you can make easier
Zero
micro
clearance.
adjustments and things like that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Plus, sometimes you need to bury the bit.
You do, yeah.
So
sometimes just kinda bury that bit.
All right.
I guess I'm feeling a little hostile this morning. I don't know. Unusually hostile.
Let's get to our next segment. It's time for our all-time favorite technique of all time for this week, and maybe we can lift Matt's spirits by letting him go first and yammering.
What do we do? Technique?
Yeah, all-time favorite technique of all time
look, it says
for
it
this
right,
week.
It says it right
bold.
there. So mine is... So something I do, I work with a lot of thin boards, right? Whether it's shops on veneers or little thin parts for drawers or tea cabinets or what have boxes. And you always, I like to hand plane my surfaces. So, but hand planing a thin board that's, like a half inch or thinner is tricky. Because if you're using, say, a number 4, the number 4 is over 2 inches wide, and it's kind of heavy, so it can teeter-totter a little bit on that narrow edge. So especially with shops on veneer, it's impossible, right? You can't do that. So I've always sort of done makeshift shooting boards for long grain, and that has to be long, and which is kind of a problem, which is why I never wanted to have one permanently because, like, where do you do with it, you know? But I finally broke down and made one, and I have to admit I'm very happy that I did, just to always have it there. And what's kind of nice about it is that they're much easier to make than a in-grain shooting board. Because an in-grain shooting board, you really do want the fence perfectly square.
And zero clearance.
And all that business. And really none of that matters with long grain.
Right.
Because for me, the long grain, it's already been jointed, so it's straight.
Yep.
Right? And I don't have to worry about that. And also when I'm doing this, the ends it's never been cut to length. So I don't have to worry about it being square to the end grain. So it really wasn't that, I tried to get it square, but I wasn't super particular about it. And I just screwed it down, and it doesn't have to be zero clearance because there's no tear out with long grain. So I made it. It clamps into my vise, and it's about, I think it's like 3 or maybe 40 inches long. So I can handle, fairly long stock that way.
Right.
So I just glued up some panels that I was making for these tea cabinets, and it worked great for that. And so I guess the technique is not the jig, but the technique is using a shooting board to plane long grain.
Well, it's putting your plane on the side on the bench and planing it that way to keep it square.
You don't take it out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, because that's one of the big challenges.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly. I don't know what I'm doing this morning. Yes. It's how to keep that edge grain, edge square to the face, is use a shooting board.
Yeah. It is one of the challenges when you're learning to use a hand plane is not taking that edge out of square as you're working the edge. It's easy to tip it.
So here's a little tip on that. So when you're doing like a 3/4 inch wide board or something, just a normal board, and you notice that it starts to get the edges no longer square to the face, always check. The first thing you should check is to see whether or not the blade is skewed in the mouth. Because if it is, it's going to take a heavier cut from one side than the other.
Right.
And that's, no matter what you do, you're going to end up planing the edge out of square.
You're just going to make it narrower, but you're not changing that angle.
So, so you got to, that's the first thing. That's the first thing I always check.
Cool.
All right. Mike?
You may have noticed on my furniture, some of the joints kind of stick out just a little bit. So I like to do a lot of through tenons, but I'm fairly discerning about the amount that the tenons stick out. And so when I'm cutting joinery, I tend to err a little bit on the heavy side because you think, 1/16 of an inch, that'll look good. But then you get the case together and it's like, no, that's way too horsey. They're sticking out way too much. I want to trim that down a little bit. But now you have this tenon cut on 4 shoulders. There's no way to trim that easily on a machine, table saw, or bandsaw without getting tear out on the corners because it's completely unsupported. So the technique I came up with, and I was just using it this week, is I get a shim. The thickness of the shim is equal to the amount that I want the tenon to actually, the finished tenon to stick out. So let's say it's like a fat 32nd, I have a fat 32nd shim, maybe a business card or something like that. So I'll dry fit the joint together. I'll loosen it up just enough to slip the shim between the workpiece and the shoulder. And then I push the joint closed. So I have a gap at the shoulder. And now I can get out my block plane or hand plane and plane the protruding tenon flush to the outside surface. And because it's like sticking through the mortise, it creates sort of like a zero clearance shooting board.
Nice. Yeah.
Plane it flush, pull out the shim, pop. There's my perfectly protruding tenon.
Yeah.
Works really well, especially for multiple tenons. You have a case side with 3 square tenons, couple shims in there, and you plane them all at once, and they're all sticking out exactly the same amount.
No tear out. How do you often chamfer the edges? How do you handle the chamfer when you've got it protruding the right amount?
Pull it out and chamfer it.
Oh, there you go.
I like it, Mike. It's very clever. I'll never do it, but it's very clever.
Thank you, Matt.
Here's something else that Matt wouldn't do.
I'm just kidding. I every time Mike describes some technique, I go home and do it for that evening. That's what I do for my entertainment.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I can't believe how many rolls of blue tape I've gone through.
That's just in the kitchen.
I don't know what does that mean?
We'll talk later. My all-time favorite technique is related to my blunder from the last episode where I built this cabinet and I used biscuits. Now, biscuits, they're really easy to use and they're pretty sound for the type of cabinet that I'm building. The problem is when you glue up the case has 2 sides and a center partition. When you try to glue them all up at once, the downside with biscuits is that part of the genius is that you can shift boards, but it's also part of the peril is that you're trying to get multiple things aligned as you're trying to clamp up.
Right.
So, when I fixed my blender and I got, I put the partition in correctly for those who didn't hear my smooth move. So I replaned everything and reassembled it. But this time what I did, and I think Mike gave me the suggestion, I think he got it from
Tim Rousseau?
No, is it the dowel at the end?
No, it was Tony O'Malley had mentioned that he clamps up one section at a time. And so what I did is I did one, I put in a side, clamped it, got it square,
cool.
let it dry, and then did the other side, did the same thing, made sure it was square. And then I did the partition at the same time I put the top on. And then it was so... I had like no sweat, no stress or anything, and everything was perfectly square. And all the only parts that I had to shift around was really the top, because the partition went into place, and that was, it was set back, so I didn't need to have it aligned with anything except the back groove for the rabbet. And it was totally a stress-free glue up, probably the most stress-free glue up I've ever had.
Cool.
And it was totally awesome.
Cool.
So
very cool. Yeah, the trick from Mark Edmondson, who does great case work, a lot of sheet goods, veneered sheet goods. He'll use biscuits to join an edge, but to maintain that alignment, he'll drill a hole for a dowel on one edge of the joint, sort of partially assemble it, get the parts lined up, and he'll use a dowel center, which is a little cup with a pointy thing on one end, to locate the dowel hole on the other side. It's sort of like when you're using a domino, you can set the width of the domino, so either in the center on one edge, I'll set that for a really tight fit, and then just open up the gaps down that line. Do you do that as well?
Really smart.
Yeah, I have done that. Yeah.
You have a domino?
Yeah. I also have a website, Tom.
Let's get to some more questions. This one comes from Matt. I've seen the recommendations to pre-finish pieces numerous times, but I don't feel like it's ever been adequately explained. Frankly, I'm intimidated. Won't I get glue on the finished pieces? How many coats should I do before finishing? And all of them? Should I do a final coat after the piece is assembled? Any advice would be appreciated.
Well, Matt, I'm glad you asked that question, because there's a lot to this.
Yeah. Well, I just don't. What does the prefix pre mean?
It's the opposite of post.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not helping.
So, okay, first off, don't be intimidated. It's no big deal. Secondly, will I get glue on the finished pieces? Yeah, the good thing is if it's pre-finished, it's going to pop off. So, the notion of, well, usually the question is, won't I get finish on the joinery? It's like, only if you put finish on the joinery.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, so keep the finish off the glue trace. Normally, I mean, you're talking about a really thin coat. You're not brushing varnish on. A lot of times, like for me, my most common wash coat is just wiping on a really thin coat of thin shellac, in which case there are no drips or runs. You can be pretty careful about it. I don't bother taping off anything. So that's no big deal. And how many coats before finishing? It depends, and it also depends what the piece is. If it's a piece that is going to be flushed up after glue up, say like, outsides of drawers or a case with flush dovetails, you don't pre-finish anything on the outside.
Right.
But it is a really good idea to pre-finish the inside, because the easiest way to sort of get finish into an inside corner is do it before it's an inside corner. And then also if you get glue, squeeze out on the inside, it's easy to chip off. So again, my stuff where the joints kind of stick out, I'm not doing any flushing after the fact, so I will pre-finish inside and out. At the bare minimum, it's a wash coat of shellac and then sand it. And it feels sort of like there isn't any finish on it at all. But the really good thing is that wash coat, it sort of raises the grain, locks it in place. So once you sand it, you're not going to raise the grain again with the next coat of finish. So even if you only do that and you need to finish the inside of the case, you're not having to do a lot of sanding and heavy lifting afterwards. So, and then on something, I will take it all the way to the final finish. I just did a piece where I actually built up a finish with shellac. I steel wooled and waxed it. So it was like done before the parts came together. And then for like a door where you are flushing up the rails and stiles and trimming it to fit, you maybe pre-finish just the door panel or the inside edges. So And then in terms of the type of finish, it can be anything from an oil to a coat, a wiping varnish, which you're going to use, or shellac, which I tend to use.
Well, here's a question from Matt.
Yes.
Did all that make sense, Matt?
You make.
Were you guys talking about something?
You make these delicate boxes. Do you pre-finish? I mean, because one of the things you think that you'd want to pre-finish areas that are just hard to reach once it's assembled.
I pre-finish the interior. What I'll do is often I'll even put the wax on for the interior.
Before you cut the miters? Or after?
No, after I cut the miters, then I'll do the finish. And say before I glue the bottom in, I'll finish the top of the bottom so that once it's in there, it's in there.
Right.
I mean that varies because I actually more often than not the inside, the top of the bottom of a box for me is either got fabric glued to it or it's been milk painted. So, but the exteriors I do not pre-finish because they require hand planing afterwards.
Sure.
But then like things like when I'm milk painting, I milk paint on the edges of a lot of things. So like the edge of all four edges of a top might get milk painted, but not the two faces of the top. And so there what I would do is I'd fit the top a little loose, just a tiny little bit loose, and then paint those edges. I would mask off the top and bottom surfaces of the top, then paint the edges, pull the masking tape off, use a scraper to knock down the little lip of paint that comes up to match the tape.
Right.
Knock that down, and then normally I would take a hand plane to that top and bottom surface, and that gets it really clean and really tight, nice, crisp corners where the painted edge and the top and bottom surfaces meet. So that's how I would do that. I don't know, is there anything else in boxes that I have to think about? I don't finish Kumiko at all. I know you do.
I don't.
You don't? Yeah, I don't either. If I did, I would probably use spray shellac. That's what I would use, but I don't finish it at all. I think that's it.
Okay.
I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Well, perfect, because that's all the time we have.
What, we're done, really?
I think we're done.
Oh.
And that's it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Tune in again in 2 weeks on October 14th for our next episode. Remember to send your questions and comments to shoptalk@taunton.com. And please spread the word about Shop Talk Live to your woodworking friends and neighbors. You can catch the podcast via iTunes, stream it on the web at shoptalklive.com, or catch us on iHeartRadio. Also, don't forget to visit finewoodworking.com to keep up with the tool giveaway for our 40th anniversary. The current prize is a combo package that consists of an assorted pack of Type-On glues, plus the Craig K5 Master System Jig and System Organizer. To win, you must enter by October 3rd. To enter, go to finewoodworking.com/40sweeps. That's the number 40. Again, that's finewoodworking.com/40sweeps. Finally, you can keep up with Fine Woodworking on Instagram and on Facebook, and look for all of us on Instagram as well. Thanks for listening, and have fun in the shop.
You know what we didn't do? We didn't do our
The stat?
Our stat. 36% of all woodworkers wear both suspenders and a belt.
Oh. And 27% of woodworkers have Googled baby carrot lathe.
Is that how they make baby carrots?
Yes.
They turn them down
Yeah.
from big carrots?
Yes.
That's awesome.
I know.